is my honor this morning to introduce David Williamson, who co-founded the Central Florida Free Thought Community, CFFC, an organization of atheists and humanists fighting for the separation between religion and government and building a secular community in Greater Orlando. David serves locally on the Central Florida Commission on Religious Freedom and Board of Directors of the Interfaith Council of Central Florida. He is also a state representative for the parent organization of the CFFC, the Freedom from Religion Foundation, a national organization which promotes the constitutional principle of separation of state and church and educates the public on matters relating to non-theism. He also serves on the advisory board of the Center for Free Thought Equality and the advocacy and political arm of the American Humanist Association. David moved from Sarasota to the Orlando area in 2012, where he met and married his wife, Jocelyn. He works in the field of occupational health and safety and is a proud father, stepfather, and U.S. Navy veteran. Some continue to assert that our Constitution Establishment Clause only prohibits the government from establishing an official state religion. This is not the case. And David Williamson, a local activist here, fighting for the separation between religion and government, will discuss this, why, and help dispel this myth. David?
Thank you. Thanks so much. It's always good to be here. And it's not often enough, but whenever you ask, I will be here. My church aversion does not apply to the UU Fellowship. So God is a big part of my life, actually. It's a part of my life that I work to try to keep out of government. So when I answer that question, I have to qualify it. Well, happy Pride. The rest of the country is wondering why the heck we're doing this in October, because they haven't been here in June. But thanks for the invitation, the very appropriate music and reading today. That was very kind of all of you who planned that. So I want to talk about something today that's meaningful to you, whether you know it or not. No matter how much you know about this, this is a part of your life, right? Whether it's the incursion of religion or keeping it out. Both of those things should be something that is meaningful to you as it is to me. And if you'd like to be in touch afterwards, can we put the slides up, Patrick? If you'd like to be in touch afterward, I've got my email here, david@cflfreethought.org, and I'll remind you of that at the end, because I want to be a resource to you, not just a conversation for this morning. So we'll start with something that Benjamin Franklin wrote in 1780. When a religion is good, I conceive that it will support itself. And when it cannot support itself, and God does not take care to support it, so that its professors are obliged to call for the help of a civil power, 'tis a sign I apprehend of its being a bad one. Franklin can't get your applause right now, but I'll pass it on. Here he acknowledges that religion can bring value to society. He doesn't deny that. He was somewhat of a religious person. You know, take that for what it is. I think the UUers understand that what it means to be religious doesn't mean what everybody thinks. But if it needs government help to prop it up, it's probably not a good religion, or at least those aspects of it. And at that point about its quality, he has his suspicions about it not being a good one. So let's look at the Establishment Clause now. It reads, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. If we evaluate the word respecting, we would think of it as with respect to or regarding. The word establishment was not confusing to the constitutional framers, who were very familiar with official state religions. In fact, many states had state religions when we founded the nation. So the clause quite simply tells us Congress cannot pass a law regarding a state religion. It does not read, Congress shall not establish a state religion. That's quite different, and it's much less restrictive. If the founders meant to do this, they had every chance to do so. The Bill of Rights went through revisions, right? It wasn't just one and done. The clause was debated and discussed thoroughly. Even more conservative language was rejected in favor of the version of the clause that we have. So in 1791, the Establishment Clause applied only to the federal government, but in 1833, all states had disestablished religion from government, if not in word, but in practice. In the 1920s, the Supreme Court began applying the Establishment Clause to the states with their interpretation of the 14th Amendment. And the state of Florida and others actually have a version of the Establishment Clause in the state constitution. Do not ask them to do that again today. So what is a law respecting an establishment of religion? It's as simple as a government, or is it as simple as a government proclamation that declares religion X as the state religion? If you wanted to create a state religion, how might you do that? What types of things would you need to be in place for your state religion to thrive or even exist as an entity of its own? Would you need to have a person or a committee in charge? Would you need resources and access to ensure that your religion would prosper? Today I'm going to talk about how you could establish your own state religion if you wanted to do so. And my hope is that we can help you dispense with the very tired argument that the Establishment Clause simply forbids the government from declaring a state religion. In fact, the Establishment Clause not only forbids state religion, it also prohibits our government from favoring one religion over another, from preferring religion over non-religion, preferring non-religion over religion as well, for that matter. So the hypothetical to be discussed for the sake of argument is this. If our government simply passed a law or amended the Constitution that declared religion X was the official state religion, what would that actually accomplish? What difference would it make if they did that, whether it's in Tallahassee or Washington, D.C.? While it might make the next steps easier, it is absolutely and exclusively, I argue, those next steps that make the only difference. Because if the only thing your state religion has is a piece of paper saying that's what it has nothing, right? Another way to look at it would be a declaration like that would be an unfunded mandate, right? It would be saying this exists, but we're not going to do anything to make sure it exists. So think about it that way. The funding in this case is the 1,000 cuts that result in the death of our religious liberties and our secular government. And I posit that the establishment of religion that has been underway for nearly 100 years now is going on without a lot of people taking notice because it hasn't necessarily affected their lives, or the relationship to those effects is not pronounced. When Equality Florida or Planned Parenthood or ACLU talk about these issues, they don't stand up against religion. They stand up against these values or those principles or these violations of our rights. But in fact, the umbrella that they're working under is the establishment of religion by generally Christian conservatives that are trying to do that. So this is not a huge conspiracy, but each player doing their part to bring about the theocracy that they believe would be better than the democracy that has served us so well. Little choreography here with the AV. So, to establish a religion that actually has government support instead of just lip service, you need for it to have power to wield, money to spend, control over your lives, special access, in particular to your children, privilege to some, and exclusion of other people based on beliefs or practices. So let's start with power, because without power, religion is helpless. You give a religion power through special access to government officials. This could be found where government officials rely on religious leaders for political guidance, and the signs of this influence are not only in the laws they pass, but how they talk about bills being proposed and considered. If you've taken the time to listen to those arguments, some people are very articulate about not mentioning religion, and others are completely ignorant and say, we're doing this because God, or because Jesus, or because my faith compels me to. Very often your political leaders will sound like religious leaders. And if you can't tell the difference, we have a problem. You give a state religion power when you allow or encourage religious leaders to electioneer, campaign, or politic on behalf of political candidates or elected officials seeking to hold on to their seats. As a matter of law, you might have a constitution that prohibits a religious test for public office, as does ours in Article 6. But if you wanted to establish a religion, you might be sure to give benefits to those candidates who openly profess alliance with the state religion. You might even make the political landscape friendlier to those people than for detractors. There are many organizations out there looking to make it easier for the, quote, right candidate to get elected. And here are just a few. A way you might do that is to conflate the values of all people with the values of the state religion. I'm so tired of hearing about Christian values. I'm so tired that I correct people and I ask them if those values are unique to Christianity. They're not, and nobody can defend that. Not even people who aren't equipped to have a conversation or theologians. Theologians don't say that because they know better. But when you say America is a Christian nation, or calling human values Christian values, that's a serious problem, and we need not let that lie. And just like I think you guys, the older I get, the less likely I am to just be quiet when people say things like that. And I hope you'll join me even more so after today. The more these phrases are repeated by political and religious leaders, the easier time that state religion has accessing even more power. You establish a state religion by giving it money. If you don't give it any money, it's far less effective. To do this, you would allow and even encourage government agencies to use financial resources and government property to promote and practice that religion. This is going on, if you're not noticing, in your local, county, and state legislatures as well. You would encourage churches to meet in government spaces by offering them discounts or in-kind donation exchanges for rental fees, which is done in the cases of local schools whose facilities get upgraded and remodeling by local churches looking to get in bed with government and have access to schools. This is an interesting story from 2014, 2013. Welcome to the Apopka High School Worship Center. It's hard to complain about that legally, right? Because they just basically put up a worship center sign when they rented the church that morning. Hundreds of churches around, not just Central Florida, but beyond, are rented, mostly on Sundays, for religious services. And this is not something that we can fight because they have to allow everyone to rent space. They can't exclude religions. You establish a state religion by directly or indirectly supporting that religion through special tax exemptions or direct aid that other religions do not receive. It's not often that you use Jewish congregations, Muslim masjids are going and saying, hey, can we get some money to fix our stuff? It doesn't happen. They don't want that attention. They don't want that money, and they understand that that money can corrupt. But you have a lot of Christian organizations doing that. That's direct aid, like grants to repair church buildings. Indirect aid might be support for religious schools through vouchers and other funds which no longer have to be covered by the church, right? So they can say, well, we're just going to use this to fix our parking lot or our playground. Well, that's money that they can now not spend there and spend somewhere else. The same thing with vouchers, right? We put all this tax money into vouchers, and they're saying, well, it's just going to the schools. It's not going to the religious function. Well, it's now not going to the state function of paying for all of the property and surrounds. It's going to the church so that they can spend it that way, any way they want. About 2,100 private schools get money from Florida government. Your tax money pays private schools to teach kids to the tune of more than $1.3 billion a year. And that number is expected to continue to rise drastically if the wrong people stay in power in Tallahassee. The overwhelming majority of these are religious schools, all of which are legally allowed to discriminate against LGBTQ and non-Christian students and students with disabilities. In 2020, more than 13,000 churches and religious nonprofits received loans of $150,000 or more, totaling nearly $10 billion as part of the Paycheck Protection Program during the COVID-19 pandemic. The Catholic Church alone received $1.4 billion. Of those, 100 paid those loans back. The repaid loans were substantial, ranging from $150,000 to $4.37 million, but the total wasn't even 1% of the spend. $66 million was repaid. So to prop up your state religion, you have to give it money, lots and lots of money. You establish religion by giving it control. Control over your lives, control over cultural norms, control over our bodies and even your mind. Without any control, it has no ability to affect change in society. You give religion control when you when you restrict business days and hours of operation based on religious rules, such as the official Sabbath, the religion of the observance of holidays of that tradition. You give religion control so it can have the power to restrict the sale of those things which fall outside the tenets of religion. How many of you are looking for something that's not open on Sunday morning, but it is on Saturday morning, right? You know now where not to go. And thank you, Jesus, for keeping everything closed on Sunday morning. And Chick-fil-A all day, but we're not going to go into Chick-fil-A. You give religion control when those sentenced for substance abuse offenses by the court are required to attend religious addiction treatment programs that promote the beliefs of the state religion. And you can benefit from AA without being religious, but you can't go to AA without having to incur religious involvement most of the time. Those opportunities without that are very rare. You have to skip steps to take the religion out of AA. Attendance in these programs is often required by the courts. And when we look at what's available out there, we see very few options for non-religious people and non-Christians. And we don't see the courts talking about those secular options. There's not a lot of funding and resources to make sure all of the local courts, and require them by checking, are showing the secular programs that do exist, that are out there. You give religion control over your mind when you allow it to disguise itself as mental health care. It's when religious parents and others prop up conversion therapy to change sexual orientation, gender identity, or gender expression. You give religion control over your bodies when you're seeking reproductive health care in the form of abortion or birth control. I don't think it's a surprise to anybody here that those are religious tenets that are making this a problem. But a lot of people don't think about that because nobody's really saying it. They're saying it's bad policy. It should be between the doctor and the family and their faith. What they're not saying is religion is the problem here, but not all religion, and certainly not all Republicans, but that is where the problem lies. We're not talking about it. If you're admitted to a religious hospital and need or desire treatment that goes against the tenets of the religion in charge of the facility, we're fortunate that Advent Health will do more for you than some Catholic hospitals, but we still have challenges and we don't know what to expect. I mean, how many of you know what things Advent Health doesn't do? Yeah, so there are some things.
No ham sandwiches.
That's the medical care I need. Ham sandwiches. So, and at the end of your life, the established religion says whether you have the right to die with dignity and on your own terms. That's religion telling you that. So to give the state religion its due, you have to be sure to relinquish a lot of control. You establish a religion by giving it access to your children. The reason the state religion needs this access is so that kids can be indoctrinated when they're young, but also while they're out of the home and in schools where religious instruction might be different or non-existent. To indoctrinate children, your state religion would do things like promote religious after-school programs for elementary school kids. This is when churches and other organizations rent a classroom on campus, perfectly legal, not perfectly legal, but legal, often on a Wednesday when students get out of class early. That way parents who don't have an option for childcare have this great Christian after-school program that can teach morals to our young folks. And they get involved in churches. And they go and ask, and you've had these conversations with your kids, hey, can I go to church next weekend? They're not just coming up with that, right? It's coming from other kids and even teachers who are involved in these programs. To give the state religion access to kids, you allow teachers, staff, and outsiders to promote and operate religious student organizations, legitimate student clubs that are being operated by non-students. They're required today to be allowed in secondary schools, which means middle and high school. But when teachers get involved, they're not just making sure kids aren't burning the classroom down. They're leading these events, and they're making it possible for them to be better funded, better sourced, and that the pastor gets let in the door every week so that he can come and do the job of preaching to the kids, or praying on them, as I like to say. You establish a state religion and take advantage of public school kids when you have prayers during school board meetings or at graduation ceremonies, or even right on campus before school starts, with staff and religious leaders participating. These rules are bent and broken all the time. There are some relatively clear areas, but there are some gray areas as well. And schools are not in the interests of parents and students looking out for the benefits of the teachers, but the case that we just saw back in the spring with Bremerton versus Washington versus Joe Kennedy, things changed. So now we got a tipping of the scale back to making sure the teachers' rights aren't infringed, which they have a lot fewer rights than students and parents when that scale tips. By the way, many of these programs that you're seeing in the schools, right? A lot of legislation is coming from Project Blitz. It's now called Freedom for All. Don't confuse it with Freedom for All Americans, which is another, I think, LGBTQ activist organization. But Freedom for All is the new name for Project Blitz. We're still referring to it as Project Blitz because it's such a great name. We don't want it to forget its roots. But this is where Christian nationalism is meeting our state legislature. It's happening right here in Florida. You establish a state religion. If you have a question, I'll be glad to answer that at the end. Yeah, hold on to that. You establish a state religion by giving that religion and its followers privilege that others don't have. In this way, you incentivize the support so that you can grow the state religion, whether through increasing numbers or believers or simply normalizing participation in state religion. Please bow your heads. Plenty of you bow your head, even if you never bow your head any other time, because that's what you're supposed to do in that moment. It's much worse when kids are asked to bow their heads. Like having prayers in the tradition of that specific religion. You establish religion by promoting a national day of prayer or having prayer breakfasts strictly in the tradition of the state religion, and you instruct all constituents to join you in prayer. This is JFK starting the trouble in 1961. So we got a little left and a little right up here, don't we? So you establish a state religion by encouraging or allowing organizations to distribute the scripture of the state religion in government property or in government schools, public schools, like in this picture from Wekiva High School in 2013, which actually has the exhibit information from the case we filed against Orange County Public Schools. We didn't file that because of the passive distribution of literature, which is when they put Bibles on a table because they were allowed to, but when people that are not students stand behind it and want to give you the good news. As you can see here, this was not the only case where an adult was here. An entire church went to a school and had help from the school getting the Bibles into the campus, putting them on the table. Well, we ended up suing, and we won because they basically said, okay, you can distribute your literature too. And then our friends at the Satanic Temple said, we've got this great activity book that you'll like. The kids are going to love it. The word got out. Someone actually reported on Raw Story that thousands of these had been distributed when I don't think any of them had even been printed at the time. The school board got hundreds of phone calls, and now the status in Orange County Public Schools is they are discriminating against religion because they don't want the Satanic Temple to put their materials out there. Right? They're okay with Hitchens and Harris and Dawkins and Dennett and whatever else we want to say, but just don't bring the Satanists in here. So they're an ally of ours for sure. You give religious privilege to adherents when judges rule in custody cases to penalize those not professing allegiance to the state religion and awarding custody to those who do, the one that claims to follow the state religion. Every year or two, we get a plea from someone who's in this situation and is looking for another attorney because the attorney doesn't seem to care. And I'm sure it's happening plenty of times that we don't hear about it. You give religious privilege to the state religion when you have civil marriage ceremonies that include religious language from the state religion, right? When you go to the courthouse and they have religious language in their ceremonies because they think everybody wants that, right? When you're trying not to hire a pastor to have a ceremony and you go down to the courthouse, you get a pastor in the form of a clerk. And we know how well that goes. You give privileges to the state religion when you allow or promote the display of religious monuments on public property to the exclusion of all others. If I were to say to you, we're going to put a chalice, a stone chalice next to the cross here. Y'all want to raise money for that, right? We'll put a chalice up there, 50 feet high next to it. You got plenty of money to spend on those, right? The problem is there are so many Christian organizations that will have a pile of money to put a cross up everywhere and say, we should all be able to do this. The Jews and the Muslims and the UUers, and they don't want to do it. Right? The Satanic Temple wants to spend $100,000 on their monument every time they put it up. So that's not going to happen a whole lot. But this is the kind of privilege that we're fighting against. And this seems normal to a lot of politicians. You give privilege to state religion when you provide the opportunity only for its chosen religious leaders to lead prayers at government meetings and exclude all others. When we started our program of invocations back in 2014, 95% of invocations offered at city and county meetings were Protestant. They didn't even have very many Catholics in there. There certainly weren't very many Jews or Muslims. And when I asked my friends in the clergy, Jewish and Muslim clergy, they don't want to be involved in that. They don't want to be a target, right? They've seen how it goes when non-Christians deliver invocations, and we've seen how it goes when we deliver invocations. But in 2015, we had to sue Brevard because they said we didn't agree with them on matters of religion, and they were even not sure if anybody that wasn't monotheistic could pray. The depositions didn't go well for them. So we won that case. In 2021, I delivered a first invocation, and I calculated, I had a video up on the internet, how many dollars were spent per second to avoid the invocation. They spent $490,000 of insurance money to have a discriminatory practice. We won, but the taxpayers of Brevard lost, right? And non-Christians everywhere, helped pay the bill to defend this discriminatory practice, because insurance isn't just paid by the insurance company. We know that. So we won that case, but how much did we really win? You can't have religious privilege without having outsiders. So you'll have to otherize and exclude some people from the privilege, right? Otherwise, what's the point? You establish a state religion by allowing companies to hire and fire people based on the religious tenets and values of the state religion, regardless of the religious tenets and values of everyone else. Like I was saying, right? Christian values aren't Christian. They're just values. They're human values, except for the ones that aren't. And we don't want to claim those. At the same time, you can allow businesses to refuse to serve those who do not conform to the state religion's brand of morality. And you certainly have to allow social services that are provided by religious organizations to discriminate against some of their clients because of the religious beliefs and non-conforming practices. Right? So sometimes we're allowing businesses to discriminate, sometimes we're allowing nonprofits to discriminate, and they're all receiving benefits from being part of society, whether it's direct support or just being allowed to do business. You establish a state religion by having a practice of swearing an oath of office, as well as oaths in courts on the holy book of the state religion. Those who don't are considered outsiders. I've wondered what it would be like if I were asked to be involved in, I haven't been in jury duty in quite a while. I look forward to it. I'm sure I won't last. But if they ask me to stand and do the pledge, or if they ask me, and they generally don't, I think we're pretty fortunate here, to swear on a Bible, right? Or if I'm a witness, how is the person I'm trying to help or not help going to benefit or be harmed by me saying I'm not swearing on a Bible, or I'm going to give an affirmation as opposed to an oath? It's difficult to know how to act in those situations, which is why when people say, let us pray, a lot of people just bow their head. Of course, discrimination by the government agencies and the religious nonprofits who rely on government funding would be permitted. We see this today in excluding LGBTQ people from full equality. And lastly, but perhaps most importantly, you establish a state religion by conflating national pride with religious morality. So I hope you recognized some, if not all, of the examples that I gave you, because they are not hypothetical. We have a state religion. We just don't have a piece of paper that says we do. These are actual violations of the Establishment Clause that Unitarian Universalists, humanists, pagans, Wiccans, atheists, Jews, and many other minority traditions fight against all the time. And of all those benefits, of all those advantages that the majority religion sees in society today, keep in mind that not one of those benefits requires it to have a proclamation stating that the majority religion is the state religion. It simply has these advantages because of its majority status. So much so that people think you can vote to pick a religion because the Christians are in the majority. This is actually the assumption that people have. It seems to me that we might already have an establishment of religion in the United States and we just don't realize it. You see, there's so much more to establishing a religion than just making an official proclamation. So how do you make the argument that any incursion into religious privilege offered by the state is the same as making a law respecting an establishment of religion? I would put it this way. If a religion can have all the benefits that Christianity has today without being the official religion of the United States, how much difference will that piece of paper make? You see, the people that make the point that the Establishment Clause is only about naming official religion, and there's a lot of smart people who are talking to people they think are dumb, and they say that. They say that it's just about an official religion. You should say to them that that's not the case. They don't need an official declaration because that's a bridge too far. They don't want you to go there. But you can bet, though, they'd probably be on the secular side of this argument if they were in the religious minority and were subject to the will of a religion to which they objected. I suggest to you that it is impossible for any state religion to have any impact on society just by being it declared so. You have to have the money, the power, the control, the access, the privilege, exclusivity. Without that, all you have is a piece of paper to frame and put on the wall and gather dust. Because it's not the act of creating a national or state religion. It is the effect of doing so that matters. And that's what the first clause of the First Amendment is about. To favor one religion over another or favor religion over non-religion is in effect to establish a state religion. Thank you so much for listening and for your continued vigilance. And I want to take a point of privilege, but I'm going to acknowledge my privilege when I say that we have a conference coming up in March. I hope some of you have considered or attended in the past. We're going to have some great speakers there. YouTuber Gudsick Gibbon, Lucian Greaves from the Satanic Temple will be there, Nadia Dutchin from the American Humanist Association, Brandon Wolf, locally an activist for smart gun rights reform, as well as Derek Demeter from the Planetarium, and plenty of other people. We're going to have a History of Drag show on Saturday night, a costume party on Friday. If you want more information about that, let me know, or you can connect with us. I have some resources on the credenza over there, and for those of you who don't know what a credenza is, that's great. It is a bookshelf with a fancy front, and it's right up next to the door there. I have to check my language once in a while because I need to know who I'm talking to, but I think most of you know. I'm able to take a few questions, but I'd leave it to our service leader to let me know if that's something we can do. And there was at least one that I wanted to get to.
We can have one or two.
Okay. Sure.
I'm going to start with Lindsay.
I don't remember the name of it. It started with a B.
Blitz.
Blitz. I want to know what that was.
So Project Blitz, sorry for going so quickly through that. Project Blitz is an effort by the religious right to pass laws in state legislatures that promote Christianity. It's part of a Christian nationalist campaign to bring us back to our Christian founding, the myth that they believe. It's called Freedom for All now, but they don't have a website because they're trying to keep this on the down low. Yeah, Project Blitz is still what you can find it as if you search.
Hey, David,
Hey.
thank you very much for a really great talk. I think I know the answer, but I kind of want it to come from your mouth. Would you recommend the documentary Hail Satan?
Oh, that's great. Yes, so we had Lucian Greaves here in 2019 to show that, and it was the best-selling movie of the film festival at the Anzion. So, and they actually brought it back later that year, and it's Hail Satan with a question mark at the end. But it was a fantastic documentary about why they do what they do. It goes through the history of the temple and talks about some of the challenges that they've had and some of the victories as well. So that's called Hail Satan.
You will be surprised.
Yeah, it's good. It's good. Yeah, Satan. The Satanic Temple does not worship Satan, by the way, just so you know.
I just wanted to address the idea of an established religion and how it permeates its way into culture. I lived for a year in Germany, and our son was 9 at the time, and when we enrolled him in the public school, they asked us, do you want him to attend the Protestant religion class or the Catholic religion class?
Oh.
And it's a weekly class that all the students attend. They go to a religious service all the time. It's very clearly an established state religion.
Yeah.
And their culture is nowhere near as religious as Americans.
Mm. Yeah.
So there is a lot of it is cultural as opposed to the establishment.
Sure. That's what happens when you don't have, as a founding principle of your nation, the separation between religion and government. We invented that here, right, as a nation. The concept existed, but we were the first to enact it. I want to point out one of the brochures I have. Each of you that is a parent or grandparent or knows somebody who's a parent or grandparent, which means all of you, pick up the Dirty Dozen, the 12 most common violations in public schools we've seen in Florida and beyond. Okay, great.
people.
It seems to me at the core of all religions is spirituality, which is a very personal connection with a higher power, or whatever you want to call it. But what goes on, it seems, is that there's a conflict between two power organizations. Whenever any spiritual practice becomes a religion, it becomes political, and with power, control, all those different issues that you were mentioning here. So it seems like there's a conflict between the institutionalization of spirituality and government. I mean, that troubles me. That
Yeah.
kind of conflict.
Yeah, for sure. I think that they need to render unto Caesar, though. You know.
This will be the last one.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. I know that was about the render unto Caesar was about taxes, but the principle is that, and even some Christian leaders talk about, you know, the will of the country and the will of government matters, and they don't. And then the same people are sometimes talking about how we need to have more religion in government. So there's this overlap that a lot of religious folks want, but I don't think that it is most religious folks, and I don't think it's most Christians or even most Republicans, like I said. But we need to keep in mind that the role of government is nothing to do with spirituality, right? And I think that's the presumption that people make. Is when I walked out of my house last month after the hurricane, I thought everybody was as fine as I was, at least in my short-term brain. And then I got farther away from my home and I realized how different it was. And it reminded me of the privilege that I try to think about all the time. I had privilege after the storm. I have privilege as a white, cisgendered, straight man. And I try to remember that all the time. And I think so many people don't even like the word privilege. And they are farthest from realizing what their privilege is. And religious privilege is probably one of the biggest problems we have.
David, thank you for your work. I've watched you and followed you for some time. I have a question about the voucher system for schools, and specifically for children of special needs. So what the state did this year is they allowed siblings of children with special needs to automatically just get a voucher as well, which whittled down tremendously the funds specifically set aside to special needs children.
Interesting.
Because now just, here you go, sibling. To quote, make it easier for the family. So that the child without the needs could go to this school and this one, and now they all could just go together. But
Right.
in function, what they did to the state and to parents taking the vouchers is we then feel we don't have any recourse to the state. So I'm just wondering how, I don't feel like that might be your wheelhouse, but it's a concern because you can't find the exact way to go back upward to say, hey, the money was set aside for the special needs child.
Right.
It is not set aside for the family of the special needs child. Sorry, I get the concept, but in practice, you're harming the child.
Right.
So there's a structural issue of vouchers and
Yeah. Thanks for bringing that up. I don't have a good answer other than to say donate all the time and money you can to putting the right people in Tallahassee, which seems like, you know, an insurmountable hill. But there are a lot more candidates that I'm supporting in this current race, and I keep track of all of the free thought friendly people that are running for office, and that list has grown tremendously in the last several years. Unfortunately, they're not winning as much as we'd like, but I will point out when we bought a car for my son, he bought most of it last year. We were asked to help education by signing away $300 worth of our taxes to private schools. And it was pitched to us by the salesperson as, you want to help education, so here, you can sign this and help education. And I quickly corrected him. I tried to remain calm. I quickly corrected him and I said, no, what that does is it actually harms public education. It fuels support for privatization, right, which is a conservative value, regardless of whether it's religious conservative, privatization of our resources. So stop telling people they're helping education when you sign this, but I'm sure that people that are trying to ease the process of car selling are just sending papers for you to sign. How many of you just signed 20 papers and you didn't know what the heck any of them were until you got home, and if never? So there are a lot of ways that we can fight against this, but some of them seem really hard. Unfortunately, a lot of them are going to be solved by getting the right people in Tallahassee, which is a challenge, especially when they redistrict to put people that are having a hard time getting elected back up there. So thank you for the questions, and I'm happy to stay around. Thank you.